Okay, so we're back. This is actually day 2. The other day when I was explaining the characteristics of the Osage Orange Tree, we started to get into some rain just before I was going to fell the limb, and unfortunately working on slick ladders and slick limbs doesn't always provide for a safe working environment, so we decided to hold off. So again, here we are. What I'd like to do before I make the cut on the limb is just walk you through my diagnosis of the limb and where I expect it to fall. And the idea here is to eliminate as many risks as possible when limbing a tree. Something of this size that we're going to be cutting down can be risky. So a good thing to point out here is that, you know, all of our videos are very informational and meant for informational purposes only. And with that, you know, if you're not comfortable with the level of risk, then please hire a professional to do the job. So with that, I'm going to give you a walkthrough of the branch itself and show you what we're looking at. So come along. So I have already done a little bit of cleaning up. We've had a lot of small saplings close to the tree just so I can get my ladder up. And those are down here, which, you know, just for information. So what we're looking at here is the back side of the tree and some of my thoughts on what I want to do here. First of all, I want to get rid of these limbs here and here. They're just in the way and they're going to cause a problem for me once I get up on the ladder and try to cut this limb. A couple other problem areas is this limb right here. I want to carve that one out and then get some of these smaller ones up top here so I can get my saw in to make my cut, my final cut. Now when cutting a limb like this, or of this size, let me zoom out here and get more of the limb in view. You're going to want to make your initial cut, which is going to be an undercut underneath the limb, up here about 1/3 of the way into the limb. And what that does is when you make your back cut, the secondary cut, and you make it almost clean through, the limb will want to fall, and because of that undercut, when the limb falls, it won't tear away the bark underneath, and a lot of that bark the tree is going to use to heal that open wound that it'll now have. So again, undercut first here 1/3 of the way through, and then back cut the limb on the top side and let the limb fall. Now another thing to consider with a limb of this size is the actual distribution of weight. So you can see this limb is very long, and as I pointed out, it falls right into an area where our kids like to play. They like this little side yard. They run their cars and toys and different things through here. So I want to make sure that, number one, I'm eliminating this risk so it doesn't become an issue further on or potentially fall as a widowmaker on somebody's head. But when doing so, again, thinking about weight distribution, I want to look, and I'm going to try to get a good view here, at this limb from the underside. And I don't know if you can see this very clearly. It's kind of hard to tell, but the limb definitely has a belly right there, and a lot of the weight is kicking that way. So what I think is going to happen is, I think once I make my undercut and I come with my final cut, the limb is going to want to roll that way. So what I'm going to do is, as I've already done, and I'll reposition this ladder for the final cut on this limb, but I want to keep my ladder on this side of the tree so that the limb will hopefully fall away from me. A couple other things to point out is that I've got my safety gear here. Always want to be prepared, so I've got a helmet with ear protection, and I've got what I use is my limbing saw. It's a small Echo, easy to sort of carry up and down trees. And again, if you're not comfortable with this kind of thing, please hire a professional. But my saw is already warm so that when I get up in the ladder, it should start right up. So with that, I'm going to start getting rid of some of these smaller branches. Up there, as you can see, I had a little trouble with just the shears. As I mentioned before, this is a very, very hard wood. So I'm gonna have to avoid using the shears because they're just not gonna cut it even for some of the smaller stuff that's only an inch to an inch and a half. So with that, I think what I'm gonna do after being up there just for that little bit, I'm gonna raise my ladder because I'm not comfortable being underneath even these smaller branches that I'm gonna try to trim off first. I wanna be above them if I can, or at least as far above them as I can, so that I'm not basically in the path of destruction. Restart the saw before you climb up the ladder, just to make sure it's operating correctly. Okay guys, so I've got my area cleaned up here. Obviously, the limbs on the ground aren't a threat to me if I'm up in the tree. Where they are a threat to me is if this limb doesn't fall the way I want to and I have to ditch off the ladder. I don't want to be jumping down onto a bunch of gnarly logs that could eventually or potentially break my ankle. So again, clean up your workspace. Again, remove as many risks as possible. Now what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna reposition this ladder a little bit further to that side of the tree. I might even see if I could use that limb up there as a potential bracing point to get my ladder further away from that limb so that I'm cutting, and if the limb rolls towards me, I'm creating a bit more distance. You don't want to be to the point where you're overextending so far that you can't control the saw, but again, you're trying to create a manageable distance so that you're in the safest area possible. Okay guys, so I've got my Rancher 55. Again, the limb is broader than I anticipated, so this has an 18-inch bar. We're gonna need the bar length to get through the limb. One thing I did notice though, my undercut, it looks good on this, on what would be your left-hand side, but on the right-hand side it's a bit shallow. So I'm gonna go ahead and touch that up to make sure that it's clean and flush, or parallel all the way through, because if I end up with a notch that's too heavy on this side or cut too deep on this side and shallower on the other side, the limb, when it falls, may well have a tendency to fall back towards me, and I don't want that. wanted to show you the limb itself before we start bucking this thing up or trimming it up for use in the mill, just to show you the condition that it was in. So as you can see here at the base, the limb looks fairly healthy. As we get further up the limb, you're going to start to see where a lower section of the limb had torn off or fell off, and due to probably high winds. And I think that damage to this limb started killing off the end of the limb, which, as I said, you can see where it fell right over the top where our kids like to play. So again, we've eliminated a threat to keep the family safe, and in the meantime, helping another neighbor out. We'll probably be able to get some lumber out of this. I don't know that we'll be able to get posts in looking at this, but this section here is probably 5, maybe 6 foot long. So we could use some, maybe get some planking out of that we could use for exterior siding or shingling, who knows, whatever Homestead might have a need for, we're going to try to make it work. But again, we're going to try to reuse this so that we don't just use it for firewood, because it's such a great wood. Thanks.